Hi guys, welcome back to Uvalde Classical Academy. Again, I'm Ms. Langham, and this is the next chapter in Esperanza Rising. Okay, we're going to be starting on page 4. I did look up some of the words here, so maybe this chapter will be a little bit less painful than the others, but no promises, because what fun is that? All right, so here we go. This is starting on page 4 of Esperanza Rising. If you'll join me, if you have your questions out, that would probably be helpful for you to take some notes because we're going to discuss as we go. All right, the title of this chapter is Las Uvas. That means the grapes, and this takes place 6 years later. Papa handed Esperanza the knife. The short blade was curved like a scythe, its fat wooden handle fitting snugly in her palm. This job was usually reserved for the eldest son of a wealthy rancher, but since Esperanza was an only child and Papa's pride and glory, she was always given honor. Last night she had watched Papa sharpen the knife back and forth across a stone, so she knew the tool was edged like a razor. Cuidante los dedos, said Papa. Watch your fingers. I hope that was better than the last one. Maybe. The August sun promised a dry afternoon in Mexico. Everyone who lived and worked on El Rancho de las Rosas was gathered at the edge of the field. Esperanza's family, the house servants in their long white aprons, the vaqueros already sitting on their horses ready to ride out to the cattle, and 50 or 60 campesinos, straw hats in their hands, holding their own knives ready. They were covered up to bottom in long-sleeved shirts, baggy pants tied at the ankles with string, and bandanas wrapped around their foreheads and necks to protect them from the sun, dust, and spiders. Ew, spiders, gross. Esperanza, on the other hand, wore a light silk dress that stopped above her summer boots and no hat. On top of her head, a wide satin ribbon was tied in a big bow, the tails trailing in her long black hair. The clusters were heavy on the vine and ready to deliver. Esperanza's parents, Romana and Sixto Ortega, stood nearby. Mama, taller and elegant, her hair in the usual braided wreath that crowned her head, and Papa, barely taller than Mama, his graying mustache twisted up at the sides. He swept his hand towards the grapevines, signaling Esperanza. When she walked towards the arbors and glanced back at her parents, they both smiled and nodded, encouraging her forward. When she reached the vines, she separated the leaves and carefully grasped a thick stem. She put the knife to it, and with a quick swipe, the heavy cluster of grapes dropped into her waiting hand. Esperanza walked back to Papa and handed him the fruit. Papa kissed it and held it up for all to see. Oh man, here's another phrase. La cosecha, said Papa. Harvest. Ole, ole! A cheer echoed around them. The campesinos, the field workers, spread out over the land and began the task of reaping the fields. Esperanza stood between Mama and Papa with her arms linked into theirs and admired the activity of the workers. Papi, this is my favorite time of year, she said, watching the brightly colored shirts of the workers slowly moving among the arbors. Wagons rattled back and forth from the fields to the big barns where the grapes would be stored until they went into the winery. Is the reason because when the picking is done, it will be someone's birthday and time for a big fiesta? Papa asked. Esperanza smiled. When the grapes delivered their harvest, she always turned another year. This year, she would be 13. The picking would take 3 weeks, and then, like every other year, Mama and Papa would host a fiesta for the harvest. And for her birthday. Marisol Rodriguez, her best friend, would come with her family to celebrate. Her father was a fruit rancher and they lived on a neighboring property. Even though their houses were acres apart, they met every Saturday beneath the olm oak on a rise between the two ranches. Her other friends, Chita and Bernita, would be at the party too, but they lived farther away and Esperanza didn't see them as often. Their classes at St. Francis didn't start again until after the harvest, and she couldn't wait to see them. When they were all together, they talked about one thing, their quinceañeras, the presentation parties that they would have when they turned 15. They still had 2 more years to wait, but so much to discuss. The beautiful white gowns they would wear, the big celebrations where they would be presented, and the sons of the richest families who would dance with them. After their quinceañeras, they would be old enough to be courted, marry, and become las patronas, the heads of their households, rising to the positions of their mothers before them. Esperanza preferred to think, though, that she and her someday husband would live with Mama and Papa forever, because she couldn't imagine living anywhere other than El Rancho de las Rosas, or with any fewer servants, or without being surrounded by the people who adored her. Okay, take a second right here. This is a natural break in the story. I want you to look and see if there were any questions that you could answer before we go forward. So push the pause button, and then when you're done looking it over and making sure you don't have any questions, then hit play. All right, glad you got a chance to do that. Here we go. It had taken every day of 3 weeks to put the harvest to bed, and now everyone anticipated the celebration. Esperanza remembered Mama's instructions as she gathered roses from Papa's garden. Tomorrow, bouquets of roses and baskets of grapes on every table. Papa had promised to meet her in the garden, and he never disappointed her. She bent over to pick a red blossom, fully opened, and pricked her finger on a vicious thorn. Big pearls of blood pulsed from the tip of her thumb, and she automatically thought, "Bad luck!" She quickly wrapped her hand in the corner of her apron and dismissed the premonition. Then she cautiously clipped the blown rose that had wounded her. Looking towards the horizon, she saw the last of the sun disappear behind the Sierra Madre. Darkness would settle quickly, and a feeling of uneasiness and worry nagged at her. Okay, before we go any farther, sorry, my nose itches. I promise I don't have corona, it's just allergies. All right, but I want you to look over here. Sorry, corona's playing in my mind. Stop. Here we go. All right, so if you look back over here, did you notice that there was not only some personification in talking about the thorn wounding her, kind of giving the thorn the power and the ability to inflict pain, right? We know that the thorn didn't like reach out and grab her or anything, but it's giving that idea. So think about that being personification, but then also think about the imagery here. Remember, imagery is word pictures, the way that words can paint a story or paint a background or paint something. So, oh, sorry, that's my phone. But also look at the way that this story describes the way that describes the idea that there might be something else happening here. So if you look at how a flower, something so beautiful, wounded this girl, do you think that this is any foreshadowing moment or a moment that might give us some idea that something bad is coming? So anyway, think about that and think about the idea that this beautiful, beautiful flower seemed vicious, and this flower created this idea that big pearls of blood would be pulsing out of her. So just think about that as we go on. Where was Papa? He had left early that morning with the vaqueros to work the cattle, and he was always home before sundown, dusty from the mesquite grasslands and stomping his feet on the patio to get rid of the crusty dirt on his boots. Sometimes he even brought beef jerky that the cattlemen had made, but Esperanza always had to find it first, searching his shirt pockets while he hugged her. Tomorrow was her birthday, and she knew that she would be serenaded at sunrise. Papa and the men who lived on the ranch would congratulate below her. Sorry, let me start over. Papa and the men who lived on the ranch would congregate below her window, their rich, sweet voices singing Las Mañanitas, the birthday song. She would run to her window and wave kisses to Papa and the others. Then downstairs she would open her gifts. She knew there would be a porcelain doll from Papa. He had given her one every year since she was born, and Mama would give her something that she had made, linens, camisoles, or blouses embroidered with beautiful needlework. The linens always went into the trunk at the end of her bed for algún día, or for someday. Esperanza's thumb would not stop bleeding. Okay, think about this. She's remembering that she stabbed her thumb, that this beautiful flower was vicious, right? And then she's wondering where her dad is. What do you think is going to happen? What do you think that bleeding thumb could symbolize? Do you think it might symbolize that something is going to happen to her physically or something's going to happen to her emotionally? What do you think the flower could symbolize in this story? So be keeping those questions in your mind as we keep reading. Esperanza's thumb would not stop bleeding. She picked up the basket of roses and hurried from the garden, stopping on the patio to rinse her hand in the stone fountain. As the water soothed her, she looked through the massive wooden gates that opened into thousands of acres of Papa's land. Esperanza strained her eyes to see the dust cloud that meant riders were near and that Papa was finally home. But she saw nothing. In the dusky light, she walked around the courtyard to the back of the large adobe and wood house. There she found Mama searching the horizon too. "Mama, my finger," she said. "An angry thorn stabbed me," said Esperanza. Now, if you think about it, can a thorn be angry? No, it can't. So that's a form of personification. "Ah, bad luck," said Mama, confirming the superstition, but she herself half smiled. They both knew that bad luck could mean nothing more than dropping a pan of water or breaking an egg. Dropping a pan of water or breaking an egg. I gotta pause for just a second so I can silence my phone here. I'm just so popular today. People keep talking to me. Let me silence it super fast. Here we go. Mama put her arms around Esperanza's waist, and both sets of eyes swept over the corrals, stables, and servants' quarters that sprawled in the distance. Esperanza was almost as tall as Mama, and everyone said she would someday look just like her beautiful mother. Sometimes, when Esperanza twisted her hair on top of her head and looked in the mirror, she could see that it was almost true. There was the same black hair, wavy and thick, some dark lashes, and fair, creamy skin. But it wasn't precisely Mama's face, because Papa's eyes were there too, shaped like flat, brown almonds. Okay, so there's a question in your sheet that's going to ask you to describe Esperanza. So make sure that you use that paragraph on page 11 to help you create that description. And my phone is still buzzing. So sorry. Let me see if I can figure out how to actually make it quiet. There we go. All right, we're still on the bottom of page 11. "He's just a little late," said Mama, and part of Esperanza's mind believed her, but the other part scolded him. "Mama, the neighbors warned him just last night about bandits." Mama nodded and bit the corner of her lip in worry. They both knew that even though it was 1930 and the revolution in Mexico had been over for 10 years, there was still resentment against the large landowners. "Change has not come fast enough, Esperanza. The wealthy still own most of the land, while some of the poor have not even a garden plot. There are cattle grazing on the big ranches, yet some peasants are forced to eat cats. Papa is sympathetic, and he has given land to many of his workers. The people know that." "But, Mama, do the bandits know that?" "I hope so," Mama said quietly. "I have already sent Alfonso and Miguel to look for him. Let's wait inside." All right, so if you have any questions, make sure that you write them down. Remember to note down questions if you don't understand something. And then if you have your physical questions that you're supposed to answer, if you find any little answers right here, now would be a great chance to pause the video and go ahead and write those down. So I'll wait for you. Not really. We're going to keep going, but you can pause it as you need. We're on the bottom of page 12. Tea was ready in Papa's study, and so was Abuelita. "Come, mi niña," said "Come, mi nieta, my granddaughter," said Abuelita, holding up yarn and crochet hooks. "I am starting a new blanket and will teach you the zigzag." Esperanza's grandmother, whom everyone called Abuelita, lived with them and was a smaller, older, more wrinkled version of Mama. She looked very distinguished, wearing a respectable black dress, the same gold loops she wore in her ears every day, and her white hair pulled back into a bun at the nape of her neck. So in case you didn't know what a nape of your neck is, that's this back part right here. So her hair is pulled into a bun there at the back. But Esperanza loved her more for her, oh my goodness, I actually don't know how to say this word, capricious? Maybe? I don't know. Someone look it up and then message me with the correct way to say it. Esperanza loved her for her more capricious ways than for her propriety. Wow, today is rough. Abuelita might host a group of ladies for a formal tea in the afternoon. Then, after they had gone, be found wandering barefoot in the grapes with a book in her hand, quoting poetry to the birds. Although some things were always the same with Abuelita, a lace-edged neck... I should take a second, and I should read slower in my mind. I don't know what's happening. I'm going to start that sentence again. Although some things were always the same with Abuelita, a lace-edged handkerchief peeking out from beneath the sleeve of her dress, others were surprising. A flower in her hair, a beautiful stone in her pocket, or a philosophical saying salted into her conversation. When Abuelita walked into a room, everyone scrambled to make her comfortable. Even Papa would give up his chair for her. Esperanza complained. Must we always crochet to take our minds off of worry? She sat next to her grandmother anyway, smiling. No, excuse me, not smiling, smelling her ever-present aroma of garlic, face powder, and peppermint. What happened to your finger? Asked Abuelita. A big thorn, said Esperanza. Abuelita nodded and said thoughtfully, No hay rosa sin espinas. There is no rose without thorns. I want you to think about that saying for just a second. I know that I said the Spanish version completely wrong, but I want you to think about the idea behind it, that there is no rose without thorns. So right now we are living through the coronavirus scare, right? There's all these different things that are going on. We have to stay in our houses. Some people are quarantined, blah, 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 blah. We had to cancel school. That would be considered a thorn, right? Life right now is just kind of crazy. There's even toilet paper shortages, all these different things. So I want you to be thinking about that idea that even though something bad happens, there can be something good that comes out of it. Or sometimes when things are good, sometimes bad things happen, and it's just a result of living in our world, and how we respond to those things is what's really important. So be thinking about that idea, not just in the context of the book, but in the context of these next few weeks that we're going to have to do learning a little bit differently, that we're going to have to structure our classes differently, that we're going to have to figure out a way to learn and to respond in this distance learning way. So just keep that in mind, that attitude is everything, and how you approach a problem determines a lot of that. So I think that's a really cool quote, and if I were you, I would definitely write it down in my notes. Wink, wink, hint, hint. All right, we're on page 14. Esperanza smiled, knowing that Abuelita wasn't talking about flowers at all, but that there was no life without difficulties. She watched the silver crochet needle dance back and forth in her grandmother's hand when a strand of hair fell into her lap. Abuelita picked it up and held it against the yarn and stitched it into the blanket. Esperanza, in this way, my love, and good wishes. Let me start that over. My inflection was incorrect. Back up, rewind. Esperanza, in this way, my love and good wishes will be in the blanket forever. Now watch. 10 stitches up to the top of the mountain, and 1 stitch. 9 stitches down to the bottom of the valley. Skip 1. Esperanza picked up her own crochet needle and copied Abuelita's movements, and then looked at her own crochet. At the top of her mountains were lopsided, and the bottoms of her valleys were all bunched up. Abuelita smiled, reached over, and pulled the yarn, unraveling all of Esperanza's rows. Do not be afraid to start over, she said. Okay, I want you to think about this idea. Abuelita is teaching her to crochet, which is kind of like knitting. You use yarn and you use these little stick things. I don't know how to do it, so I'm going to call them stick things, or crochet needles, I guess is the correct word for them. But she's having her go in this zigzag pattern, going up and down and up and down and up and down. So I want you to think about the symbolism behind that, how our lives sometimes have those different peaks and valleys, and that's what her grandmother is trying to explain to her, that every life has difficulty. Every up has a down. Every rose has a thorn. And so we have to take life as a whole. And when we string all of this series of up and down and up and down and up and down together, it creates something beautiful. Like when Esperanza gets done with this crochet pattern, it's going to turn into a blanket that is absolutely beautiful. So be thinking about how all things, and the Bible even tells us that God works all things together for the good of those who love him. All right, so back to the book now. Here we go. Do not be afraid to start over, she said. Esperanza sighed and began again with 10 stitches. Softly humming, Hortensia, the housekeeper, came in with a plate of small sandwiches. She offered one to Mama. No, thank you, said Mamma. Hortensia set the tray down and brought a shawl and wrapped it protectively around Mamma's shoulders. Esperanza couldn't remember a time when Hortensia had not taken care of them. She was a Zapotec Indian from, I don't know how to say this either, Oaxaca? I'll figure out how to say that. I will, for the next chapter, I'll know how to say it. All right. She was an Indian with, let me start over one more time. She was an Indian with a short, solid figure and blue-black hair in a braid down her back. Esperanza watched the two women look out into the dark and couldn't help but think that Hortensia was almost the opposite of Mamma. Don't worry so much, said Hortensia. Alfonso and Miguel will find him. So you can tell that Mama is really worried. You can tell that Esperanza is starting to feel worried. She's not exactly sure what she's worried about, but you can tell that she's beginning to kind of find it odd that her dad's not back. Alfonso, Hortensia's husband, was el jefe, the boss of all the field workers, and Papa's compañero, his close friend and companion. He had the same dark skin and small stature as Hortensia, and Esperanza thought his round eyes, long eyelids, and droopy mustache made him look like a forlorn puppy. That's kind of a funny way to describe somebody. Does it give you a mental picture? Can you see the imagery here? Can you see the importance of picking the right words for the right situation so that you can make sure that you give your reader a very clear picture of what you wanted to say? So in your writing, when we do creative writing, when we do writing and rhetoric, remember your word choices matter because you want people to not only understand what you're saying, but to feel and see the things that you're saying. All right, again, back to the story. A forlorn puppy. He was anything but sad, though. He loved the land as Papa did, and it had been the two of them, working side by side, who had surjected? No. I feel silly now. Let me start over now that I can read English. I was trying to read it in Latin for some reason. Here we go. All right. Blah, blah, blah. He loved the land as Papa did, and it had been the two of them, working side by side, who had resurrected the neglected rose garden that had been in the family for generations. Alfonso's brother worked in the United States, so Alfonso always talked about going there someday, but he stayed in Mexico because of his attachment to Papa and El Rancho de las Rosas. Miguel was Alfonso and Hortensia's son, and he and Esperanza had played together since they were babies. At 16, he was already taller than both of his parents. He had their dark skin and Alfonso's big, sleepy eyes and thick eyebrows that Esperanza always thought would grow into one. It was true that he knew the farthest reaches of the ranch better than anyone. Since Miguel was a young boy, Papa had taken him to parts of the property that even Esperanza and Mama had never seen. When she was younger, Esperanza used to complain. "Why does he always get to go and not me?" Papa would say, "Because he knows how to fix things and he is learning his job." Miguel would look at her, and before riding off with Papa, he would give her a taunting smile. But what Papa said was true, too. Miguel had patience and quiet strength and could figure out how to fix anything. Plows and tractors, especially anything with a motor. Several years ago, when Esperanza was still a young girl, Mama and Papa had been discussing boys from good families whom Esperanza should meet someday. She couldn't imagine being matched with someone that she had never met. So she announced, "I'm going to marry Miguel." Mama had laughed at her and said, "You will feel differently as you get older." "No, I won't," Esperanza had said stubbornly. But now that she was a young woman, she understood that Miguel was the housekeeper's son, and she was the ranch owner's daughter, and between them ran a deep river. Esperanza stood on one side, and Miguel stood on the other, and the river could never be crossed. Okay, so the river that they're talking about here is that economic class separation. So we've been talking about in history how we have all this segregation going on. And in history, this is exactly where we are. We're in the 1920s going into the 1930s, and all of that era. And you have to remember, segregation was a very real thing, but not only segregation with people's color of skin, but segregation between standard of living and between money and no money, owning land, not owning land, being a servant, being, a boss, all those different things. And in Mexico at this time, that was really happening between the classes. So you had the people who were the workers and you had the people who were the landowners. And those two classes did not mix. So it actually would have been very unheard of for a ranch owner's daughter to marry someone who is considered of the servant class, because that was something that did not happen. Remember, here in America, we're not so much at this time frame having servants and things like that, but we are separating versus education versus color versus religion. You can see a lot of that separation there in the United States in our history. So it's really cool to see how all of this ties in all together. All right, back to the book yet again. In a moment of self-importance, Esperanza had told all of this to Miguel. Since then, he had spoken only a few words to her. When their paths crossed, he nodded and said politely, "Mi reina," my queen, but nothing more. There was no teasing or laughing or talking about every little thing. Esperanza pretended not to care, although she secretly wished that she had never told Miguel about the river. Distracted, Mamma paced at the window, each step making a hollow tapping sound on the tile floor. Hortensia lit the lamps. Minutes passed into hours. "I hear riders," said Mamma, and she ran for the door. But it was only Tio Luis and Tio Marco, Papa's older stepbrothers. Tio Luis was a bank president, and Tio Marco was the mayor of the town. Esperanza didn't care how important they were because she did not like them. They were serious and gloomy and always had their chins too high. Tio Luis was the eldest, and Tio Marco, who was a few years younger and not as smart, always followed his older brother's lead, like un burro, a donkey. And even though Tio Marco was the mayor, he did everything Tio Luis told him to do. They were both tall and skinny, with tiny mustaches and white beards just on the tip of their chins. Esperanza could tell that Mamma didn't like them either, but she was always polite because they were Papa's family. Mamma had even hosted parties for Tio Marco when he ran for mayor. Neither had ever married, and Papa said it was because they loved money and power more than people. Esperanza thought it was because they looked like two underfed billy goats. "Ramona," said Tio Luis, "we may have bad news. One of the vaqueros brought this to us." He handed Mamma Papa's silver belt buckle, the only one of its kind, engraved with the brand of the ranch. Mamma's face whitened. She examined it, turning it over and over in her hand. "It may mean nothing," she said. Then, ignoring them, she turned towards the window and began pacing again, still clenching the belt buckle. "We'll wait with you in your time of need," said Tio Luis, and he passed Esperanza. He patted her shoulder and gave it a gentle squeeze. Esperanza stared after him. In her entire life, she couldn't remember him ever touching her. Her uncles were not like those of her friends. They never spoke to her, played, or even teased her. In fact, they acted as if she didn't exist at all. And for that reason, Tio Luis's sudden kindness made her shiver with fear for Papa. Abuelita and Hortensia began lighting candles and saying prayers for the men's safe return. Mamma, with her arms hugging her chest, swayed back and forth at the window, never taking her eyes from the darkness. They tried to pass the time with small talk, but their words dwindled into silence. Every sound of the house seemed magnified, the clock ticking, someone coughing, or the clink of a teacup. Esperanza struggled with her stitches. She tried to think about the fiesta and all the presents that she would receive tomorrow. She tried to think of bouquets of roses and baskets of grapes on every table. She tried to think of Marisol and the other girls giggling and telling stories. But those thoughts only stay in her mind for a moment before transforming into worry, because she couldn't ignore the throbbing soreness in her thumb where the thorn had left its unlucky mark. It wasn't until the candelabra held nothing but short stubs of tallow that Mama finally said, "I see a lantern. Someone's coming!" They hurried into the courtyard and watched a distant light, a small beacon of hope swaying in the darkness. The wagon came into view. Alfonso held the reins and Miguel the lantern. When the wagon stopped, Esperanza could see a body in the back, completely covered with a blanket. "Where's Papa?" she cried. Miguel hung his head. Alfonso didn't say a word, but the tears running down his round cheeks confirmed the worst. Mama fainted. Abuelita and Hortensia ran to her side. Esperanza felt her heart drop. A noise came from her mouth, and slowly her first breath of grief grew into a tormented cry. She fell to her knees and sank into a dark hole of despair and disbelief. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is page 22. So that ends our very first chapter. So make sure you go and answer those chapter questions, and I will see you next time for the next chapter that we have in Esperanza Rising. All right, I hope that you guys enjoyed this literature lecture for our 6th grade class here today, and I look forward to doing more with you guys throughout the coming weeks. All right, we'll talk to you later. Bye.